We're up to here. Heichi Nafel, about 6 lines on the top of the page. So our Mishnah just reminded what's going on here. Talking about if an animal fell down and somebody's garden, and the crop that buffered the fall, then he has to pay not the value of the food, but the value of the benefit to the animal. What else could have cushioned the fall a lot cheaper? But the animal ate from the crop. Then if the animal walks in on its own and eats, then you pay for the damage. And then the question is, how do we assess the damage? We'll see in a minute. So let's first focus on the first part. The animal fell in. What's considered falling in that is not really your fault? Because it was an accident, that's why we minimize the amount you have to pay. Only what is the benefit that the animal had from it. So how did it fall? Rav Kahana says, it was an accident. It slipped in its urine, somebody else's urine. The point is, it was an accident. And that's why we mitigate the amount you have to pay. But Rava Omar, there were a number of animals walking together, and it was a bit crowded. So one animal shoved the other animal off whatever it was, and it fell down into this person's garden, which is slightly negligent because you should have been more careful, pull your animal away, it shouldn't be so crowded. So, Mando Amar Shedach Fasachav, the one that said that the animals sort of shoved the other animal with slight negligence. Surely, if it slipped, which is a total accident, surely that you don't have to pay more than the benefit that the animal had. But a man, the one who says that when we talk about an accident, the description is that the accident because it slipped into your urine. But if, let's say, it was shoved by the other animal where there's some negligence involved, then you're not going to get away with just paying for the benefits of the animal. Then you actually have to pay a lot more than that. You'll have to pay the amount of damage that you caused it to happen. Because here is very negligence, according to this opinion. The Amalek, because he said, the owner of the garden says to the owner of the animal, you should have made sure that one animal crosses at a time, not a number of animals together. Now we're saying further, Rav Kahana said that we're saying over here, what happened? The animal walked in, fell in. You only pay for the benefit to the animal. What happens? What happens that while it fell down and the whole thing happened by accident, it started to eat. It noticed that it fell down in the garden, so it started to eat from the crop. Now, because it didn't just wander into the field, it fell into the field, we consider it an onus, and even if it eats around the vegetables around it, you don't have to pay any more than the benefit to the animal from falling down. So he says over here, when you say you're exempt for paying if the animal started to eat the vegetables around it, only that very same patch. If the animal picks itself up, walks over to the next patch, and starts eating from there, then then that's separate. That's a separate story, and you pay what you ate. And Rabbi Yochanan says no. Afilu ma'aruga. Rabbi Yochanan says that when the animal fell down in this garden, we don't just say, oh, that particular row of vegetables was a cushion. We say the garden acted as a cushion. So everywhere in that garden is considered as if it's part of that buffer. So therefore, if the animal picks it up and starts wandering about the ate, it's still part of that same accident, and you only pay the benefit to the animal and not the damage that the animal is causing. Says, yeah, even all day long, unless Shetetze, the animal leaves the garden and then the tarzer and returns to the garden the second time, once it returns to the garden, it's no longer part of the accident. Now the animal is going to pay for whatever damage it causes. The das willingly. Amar Papa says when we say the animal went back willingly, it doesn't mean the das. You would think it means that you saw the animal going into the garden again. And he did nothing about it. No, he said, I'll tell you better. As long as you knew the animal left the garden, even if afterwards you were not aware that the animal went back, and you had a normal, let's say, protection, the animal shouldn't wander about. If the animal breaks through and goes to the garden, you're responsible. You know, just like a cat. You give a cat some milk, they'll keep on coming back to you for more and more and more because they know that this is where they get the supply. Same with an animal. If it went into a garden, true, it was there by accident, but now that it had all this food, so it'll always go back there again. So you should have been aware of that and taken extra precautions that your animal, once you knew that your animal left the garden, you should take extra precautions, make sure the animal does not return. And an ordinary standard fence might not be good enough. I'm gonna papa like Tema. Don't think agitates it left willingly and then went back willingly. Once it left willingly, even though it came back without your knowledge, you're responsible. My time why? Because the owner of the garden says now to the owner of the camp, Kivan the Yalfa. Once the animal learned about my garden, became familiar with it, Kol Amos the Mishtamta, whenever your animal sneaks out, we think he's running to my garden. So you should have been far more careful and you're responsible. Let's think about it further. But what the Mishnah continues, what about Yorda Kedarka? The animal went down normally. There was no accidents. Behizika and caused all kinds of damage. Mishalem es mashizika pays exactly the kind of damage that it was. And we also learned that if it ate, then you pay, even though it's expensive wheat, you only pay like barley, what you normally feed the animal. So, we had before a discussion if something started out, let's say, was negligent, but what actually happened at the moment of the damages was an accident. So we asked, how do we treat that? Do we say, since it started out being negligent, we don't care what happened afterwards, it's your fault? Or do we say we look at the moment of the accident? The moment of the accident, there was an accident, so therefore we treat it as an itis. So we have an argument. So Vimy asked an interesting question. What happened? Yard or Kedarka, the animal went into somebody else's field, trespassed normally, didn't fall off anything. So this is negligent. If the animal started eating, you'd pay the full damage. But the Hezika later. But what happened was that the animal was pregnant and suddenly gave birth, and it burst its water, and there's water everywhere. It completely ruined the guy's crop. So it started out negligence, he trespassed on someone's property, but it ended up being an accident. How do we treat that? Now, isn't that the argument of Tchilosa B'Pshir V'Seif What's he saying? He's saying this. Eliba demandam, according to the opinion that said Tchilosa B'Pshir V'Seif V'Einis Chayiv, like the Bailach. I have a question. For sure you're Chayiv, right? Because it started out being negligent. Key to Bailach, the question is, Eliba demandam Tchilosa B'Pshir V'Seif V'Einis. The one that says that I don't care how it started out, we look at it now. Now it's an accident. If he was pregnant, so he is Potter. Maya. What will it do? We are up to Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph, towards the bottom of the page. We're talking about over here if an animal ends up in someone's garden by accident, and the garden's saved, saved its fall, it didn't harm itself. You have to pay to the animal. Sorry, you have to pay the benefit to the animal. So you're not paying the full amount of damages. You're only paying that, the animal could have been saved with something else, which would be a lot cheaper, and that's what you pay. But if the animal wandered in willingly into somebody else's property, then you pay for all the damages the animal did. He ate the crop, ruined the crop. So we had a question. Now, this is the bottom of the page in Chesam and Aleph, the last line, actually. And the question is, the animal wandered in willingly. But what happened was that the animal suddenly gave birth. It was a full gestation period, suddenly gave birth, and it burst its water, and the water spread everywhere, completely ruined the crop. So according to the view that says that Tchilasa B'Pshir, if it started out being negligence, and Seifa B'Ayin turned out to be an accident, you are exonerated, how would we view this? On the one hand, you would say, well, you're potted, same thing. The animal should not have gone in, that's Tchilasa B'Pshir. The end was that it burst its water, and therefore it's an accident, it should be potted. However, there's another side to it. The last line in Nun Ches Amud Aleph, ideal perhaps. Over here, Kula b'pshihu. Maybe the entire thing is negligent, including the bursting of the water. You know why? The kiva de kachaza. You can see the kreva leila melin. You can see your animal's about to give birth. Yiboy leila natuda. You should have watched the animal ulasam tude bigavo, and you should have kept it inside and be very, very careful. In other words, it's not an oinus. Maybe this isn't an oinus because you saw your animals in the full gestation. They'll give birth any moment. You should have made sure it doesn't trespass into other fields. So it's not just chilasa b'pshir, it's seifa b'pshir as well. Take it, we remain with the question. So then we're up to the Chet on the base, the very top of the page. In our Mishnah, it says the animal walked into somebody's field and ate from the crop and so on. You got to pay and cause damage, whatever it is, you got to pay. And the question is, how much? How do you assess the damage? I mean, let's say a strawberry patch and it ruined some of the strawberries. How do you assess the damage? You just look at the strawberries that he ruined in isolation and say, well, this is a pun of strawberries. It sells in the store for $5. That's what he did, $5 of damage. And the Mishnah says no. The Mishnah says you assess the damage based on the proportion in the field. You assess it against the entire field. That's what's the field worth if these strawberries were intact, and what's the field worth now, the strawberry minus these strawberries. And that's how you assess the value of these strawberries, which we're going to talk about now in the Gemara. Rav Shimon disagrees. He says that if the fruits, I agree with you in principle, but if the fruits are whole, which means it's about to be harvested, we treat it as if it was already cut off, and then we don't look at the land at all, we just look at these fruits. So now the Gemara is going to work out, and we have an interesting formula of how to work it out. How do you pay the damage? So first of all, the very notion that you don't just look at the fruits of the crop that you ruined, but we look at it in comparison to the rest of the field. Where do you get that from? Why don't you just pay straight out? So the Gemara will say that's a pasuk in the Torah and you can't do anything about it. No, I mean, how do you know? I'm a master. I'm across. Says the pasuk. The pasuk says that if you go ahead and you send your animal, and it consumed. Consumed another field, you have to pay for your best properties and your best vineyard. That's what you have to pay. What's the expression of bi'er b'zdei consumed in another field? Melamed sheshamin al gabe sodacha. When it comes to pay, you assess it in the value of the whole field, not just these, let's say, strawberries in isolation. Says the Gemara, how can, first, before we get into it further, I want to know, we already use these words to teach you a general principle regarding Shen, that Shen is you're only liable for Shen if it trespassed into somebody in the victim's field. But if, for example, the animal was eating in a public place, you don't have to pay Shen because it says b'zdei. So how can you use the same pasuk for a second drasha? So when I ask how you be b'zdei, don't we need a lafukish to tell you that if the animal was eating in a public space, you don't have to pay. So how can you learn this other din that you want to learn, that when it comes to payment, you don't just pay for the damage in isolation, you view it in contrast to the rest of the field. Says the Gemara, because if so, the only purpose of the pasuk is to teach you that if you trespass your chay, but not we could have used different words. What's acher? Or even furthermore, inami sada acher, my bisada, the letter base is extra. What is bisada? Sheshamin al gabi sada acher. You know what says bisada? Because you draw a contrast to other fields. You draw a contrast. In other words, when it comes to payment, you don't just pay for whatever the vegetables or the grains of the animal damage. You compare it to the entire field. There's actually a famous debate as to how do we understand there's two ways to understand the Gemara. When you damage part of a field, do we take a holistic view and say, wow, you damaged the field? Even though you only damaged 10% of the field, we say you damaged the field, or do we just look at it in isolation and we say we only focus on the damage? Well, this section of the field was damaged. The rest of the field is still intact, nothing changed. So that's the argument. And one opinion says when you damage, doesn't matter what percentage of the field it is, we'll take a holistic view and say, you damaged the field. How much? So then we say, well, the field if it would have been whole, it would have worth X amount of dollars. Now that you ruined that section, it's worth Y amount of dollars. So that's the damage you did. The other view says no. The other view says that when you damage a section of the field, you only damage that section of the field. The rest of the field is all good. The Torah just says when it comes to payment, I look at the rest of the field. But when it comes to the damage, all you damage was this little section there and nothing else. So so the Gemara is saying right now we look at the entire field. But now the Gemara wants to know how exactly do we do this? Anyway, so let's just finish. Highlight two things. It could have said without the base. My agav sodaach. And we learn from here that when you pay, you assess it based on the entire field. So maybe that's the only purpose of the pasuk to tell you how to pay. How do you know when it comes to damages that it's important to be in trespassing before you're liable? So the Gemara, because in Cain, if it's not then the trader, if the only purpose of the trader is how to pay, then the trader should have written this pasuk in the end of the pasuk. The end of the pasuk talks about how you pay, Meitav Sadeh, Meitav Kamishah, and that's where it should say this thing here. Why does it say in the first part of the pasuk, where in the first part of the pasuk it talks about the damages? It says it says in Obir B'Zdei. That's talking about the damages. If we're talking about the payment, why talk about it in the first part of the pasuk? Must be also describing to you the damages have to be B'Zdei. The pasuk could have said Meitav Sadehu, Meitav Kama Yishalom, B'Soda Achalamali. The cost of why the Torah writing Gabi Bir Shma Minotati. Teach you two different. Actually, when in the yeshiva world, in the learning world, we learn Rambam, and you look at every word of the Rambam, how particular he is, how pedantic he is. So you look at the words, what he says, what he doesn't say. But equally important is where the Rambam positions a certain law. The position that in itself is an indication of all kinds of interesting nuances that comes from the Gemara right here. It's the fact that the pasuk is written in the fact that these words written in the first part of the pasuk, that in itself teaches you that even when it comes to the damages, it has some relevance as well. And this idea is how we learn the Rambam and other Rishonim. Says the Gemara. Now, Heichi Shamin. And this is fascinating how Rashi learns and traces. How do we assess? You say you take it against the whole field. So how does it work? So in a nutshell, let's do the first opinion. 3 opinions. The standard is 60, a multiple of 60. We're trying to actually make it a little bit easier on the mazik, so he doesn't do it again. He pays his penalty, doesn't do it again. So this is how it works, according to Rashi. Rashi says that if you're in it, okay, we know you have to take it and broaden it and not just look at the damage itself, but broaden it. So if we're going to broaden it to 1 saw, saw is the equivalent of 6 kavan. A saw is an area of land 50 amas by 50 amas. It's like 75 feet by 75 feet. A very small patch of land. That's a saw. If we're going to look at the value of a saw and then work back and say, so you damage, let's say 50 kavan, a half a saw, what's the value of the damage? What happens is that the mazik is going to pay an extraordinary amount, because anybody who has money, serious money, is not going to buy a saw. It's too small. You buy in bulk. Whoever buying such small parcels of land, only somebody cannot really afford it. And it's a true. The truth is, it's a truism that rich people pay a lot less for things than poor people do. Rich people could buy in bulk, could buy it wholesale. A poor person can only buy small quantities, so he pays top dollar. So a saw on its own is a lot more expensive. So what we do is we'll say, you know what? Let's look at, if you want to work on the value of a saw, let's take a parcel of land that's 60 saw. 60 saw. And then let's say 60 saw sells for $600. That means each saw is worth $6. So then we say, okay, now that we've established a saw $6, now let's see. The animal eaten a certain amount of the saw. What would that saw sell for intact? We know it would sell for $6. But now that it's minus a certain section because the animal damage, what's it worth now? $4. Okay, the damage is 2. So there's 2 stages in this assessment. First, we go to 60 saw, bring it down to a saw, and then from a saw we work out the amount of damages compared to a saw. That's how Rashi learns. Taisa learns we just take it, we take it to a multiple of 60 times. We don't do 2 stages. But anyway, let's continue. We'll go according to Rashi. Rabbi Yanai says, Tirkav b'shishim tarkibim. Tirkav is 3 kav, which is 3 kav, which is a half a saw. And 60 times that is 30 saw. So the way many Rishonim learn is, and in Rashi there's different opinions, we take, instead of 60 saw, they say, let's do 30 saw. Because they say 60 saw, 1 saw in a field that's 60 saw large, 1 saw is not worth much. So the nizik is sort of being cheated out, because it's a massive field, 59, 60, the price is not going to be that different. But we work on a 30 saw field. What's 1 saw compared to 30 saw? Far more, far greater, far larger amount. Then once we've established the value of saw, now let's go and see the damage you did, the impact it has. So the saw instead of being worth $6, maybe worth now $10. Okay, that's opinion number two. Opinion number three is Chizki. Chizki says we don't do the two stages. You just look at whatever the animal ate. Let's say the animal ate a kav. So then you do a multiple of 60, and you say, well, if you would buy 60 kavin of this particular kind of grain, it would cost you $100, $120. Now, what would it sell for if you only be 59, a multiple of 59 of this particular grain, of kavin of this grain? It would sell for a bit less. That's the amount of damage. That's the damage that was done. So, yeah. Let's continue. So that's the opinion number three. Says the Gemara, that's Chizkiah. So the Gemara makes that's a question. But all three of you say that we do a multiple of 60s. I have a question. It says in the Brisa, if you ate a kav, the animal ate a kav, two kav, Ein oimrim tishalon demain. We don't say just pay it outright, whatever it sells in the store. Eloroin, I say we imagine ki'ilu hi'aruga ktana, as if it's a small patch, uma'ashayrin oisa, and we assess whatever that small patch is. You said a multiple of 60, and here it seems clearly that we don't do a multiple of 60. My lab is we just look at a small little patch, and that's it. Was a learner b'shishim. The Brisa didn't bother delineating exactly how it works, but it's 60. Says the Gemara, the Brisa, very cryptic Brisa. Ain shamin kav. The Brisa says you don't assess by a kav on it. We're going to see that later. The Gemara, I'm going to learn the Brisa the way we learn it later. Ain shamin kav. You don't assess the pay for the kav on its own. The pneishim mashbichai. Because then you're raising the price. If you look at the kav on its own, when it's a small amount, it sells for a substantial amount of money. Nor the loy base kur, nor do you look at it as if it's part of a kur. We'll soon see what that means. Because then it's such a small amount in the presence of a kur. You know the value of this? Nil. So the nizik will be cheated. So my comments. We have two opinions as to what the Brisa is actually saying. This is how you learn the Brisa. Ein shavin kav v'shishim kavim. He says in the Brisa, you don't assess a kav in 60 kavim. Why not? This is a papa. You don't do a multiple of 60. Mashbiach mazik. Because if an animal ate one kav, you don't say, well, let's look at 60 kav and what it cost and 59 kav and what it cost. Because in that case, the mazik actually will have to pay more. Why? Because 60 kavin is not a very big amount, and it's a rich person is not going to buy such a small amount, or even an average person is not going to buy such a small amount. And number one, so therefore, because of the small amount, you're going to be paying an excessive price, and more than that, one kav among 60 is negligible. So what's the nizik going to get for it? Nothing. You don't do that. Nor kur b'shishim kurin. Let's say the animal ate a full kur, which is 30 saw, a large amount. You don't assess it against 60 kur. Why not? Because that is going to cost the mazik. 60 kur is a massive property. Very seldom do you find that on the market you can buy such a massive lot of land. And when it does come on the market, you pay an exorbitant price because it's so rare. So then when you work back to one kur, it'll be a lot more valuable than a lot more expensive than a normal kur on its own. And comes out the mazik has to pay too much money. That's what a papa says. Maskul Rabbi has a question. So why does it say like base kur? Well, like kur, but according to you, the way you learn is a kav you multiply by 60, or a kur you multiply by 60. So why by kav it just says the word kav, and by kur it says base kur, the house of kur, just use the same word kur, and not a kur to 60. So it means something else. This is how you understand the Brisa. Ain shavmin kav. If the animal ate a kav, which is a small measure of the tvua, you don't just say, okay, what does that kav sell for in the supermarkets, and that's what you have to pay. You don't do that. The nation will pay. Will getting extra money. Not really worth it. Nor because you don't do retail. If the animal damaged the nizik. Why should the nizik get the retail price? No. Nor the light kav the base kur. On the other hand, you're not going to take this kav and multiply it and turn it into a base kur. Let's say 30 saw. You know what a kav? There's 6 kav into a saw. And if you then go to a base kur, which is 30 saw, it's 180 kav, which means the percentage of one kav to a base kur is 180th. Nothing. And if you're going to put it on the market and you're going to sell somebody 180 kur or some 179, you practically get the same price. So that means that the nizik won't get paid for the damage that occurred. They should pay him nizik. You'll damage the nizik. And what we do is b'shishim. We always calculate in a multiple of 60. And 60, you're getting a fairer amount. Says the Gemara, Hogava, there's a person, the cuts cash from Mechaber. The person went over and proactive, this is a person, an animal, cut down a palm tree from his friend. Also, so he went to the where he was taken to it in Torah to the head of the gullus in Bava Amalei, so the head of the gullus. So he said, to me, it seems but Tulasa told to Bekina, I saw this place with 3 nice palm trees stacking next to each other. The total value of the 3 trees is worth $100. So you damage a third. Zil Havle plus in Betilsa. 33 and a third, but you have to pay him 33 and a third dollars because that's what you did. That's the damage you did. Omar got it. So this guy was very disappointed, and he says, "Gaberej Galusa. Am I going to go to Din Torah to a Reish Galusa that has no clue of how to paskin? The Doyin Dina de Parsa, he's paskin like the Persians, like the Goyim. We do multiples of 60. What he should have done is, what's this one palm tree? If you would have sold 60 of such palm trees, what would it sell for? And now 59 of these palm trees, what would it sell for? And that's what I paid that difference, not 3 palm trees. It doesn't matter whether in this particular situation all you have is 3 palm trees. It's a general rule of thumb that we make. This is a formula. We multiply by 60, and that's what and we work out 60, 59, and that's what you pay. Lumberly. So why would I go to a Persian court? He doesn't know it's halacha. Also, the Kamed Rav Nachman went to Rav Nachman. Do you have the keys?
I don't need to get anything.
Okay, well, you have the keys.
I have the keys.
Okay. Amalei, he said to him, Bishishim. He said to Rav Nachman ruled exactly like this person said, 60, a multiple of 60. Amalei, Rava said, Rava comes along and he wants to say as follows. There's a big difference in Rava's opinion, whether your animal causes the damage or whether the person himself proactively causes the damage. He says, look, when you know why we're so lenient here? Why you're not paying the retail price, you're paying the wholesale price? You know why? Because you didn't do the damage, your animal did. Because your animal did the damage, we have a little rachmanis in you, and we say, look, it's sort of distant from you, we're going to pay a lesser amount. But in a case where you personally went ahead and you caused the damage, why should we have any rachmanis? You should pay the full amount. So therefore, he said to him, Rabbi said, if a case where your animal caused damage, they're going to say the same thing when you personally cause the damage. So that's why Rabbi disagreed with his Rebbe Reb Nachman. Abaye turned to Rabbi and said, you just came up with a new chiddush. You need to have a basis. And I imagine the basis is a certain brisa where it talks about a case where somebody caused damage and ruined some fruits and how you assess the damage. And it doesn't mention there a word about a multiple of 60. So you assumed that when it comes to a person proactively causing damage, you know multiple of 60. You look at what the damage is, and that whatever that is, that's what you pay. And Abaye said, you are wrong, as we'll see. What was your opinion? Time we learned, if somebody goes ahead and destroys the vineyard of his friend Samoda when it's a stage of budding grapes, we look at the vineyard. The vines. Look at the damage you did. What this particular vine, what was it worth together with the grapes, and was it worth not without the grapes? And that's what you pay. The ilu b'shishim like time. Doesn't mention a word about a multiple of 60. And this is a case where the man went over and destroyed the grapes, the vines. So therefore, you assume that when a person does it, there's no such thing as a multiple shishim, and try and make it easy. So let me ask you a question. I'll find you another brisa that talks about an animal causing damage, and there also doesn't mention a multiple of 60. What are you going to say? But we know that we do pay a multiple of 60. The brisa doesn't bother to delineate every time in detail how it's done. So just like by an animal, it'll admit 60, but it means you have to do a multiple of 60. By a person also, it's a multiple of 60. So now we're going to quote a brisa, and tomorrow's Gemara is going to focus on this brisa. So you have a number of cases here. Case number 1. Altogether, Ramatanya, Kagabo, Simatan, the Bryce, when cut on the tea, what happens if an animal came along and cut down a sapling, a young little tree? Rabbi Yossi says, those people who make all these the different rules in Shalim, Admon, Admon and Chonan ben Abishalom, we had them in the last parak of Ksubas. They say the following: as a minimum, the tier, it could be more, but the minimum, if the animal destroyed a sapling, bashnos of 1 year old, stay kesef, got to pay 2 silver coins. Bashtei shani, if it's 2 years old, abo kesef, 4 silver coins. Okay, next case. Ochla, the animal ate chazis. Chazis is I guess grains that are just starting to shoot up. Ate the chazis is Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Says, you know what he says? He says nidain b'meshuyah. Very interesting. He says, okay, at this stage right now we're just starting to grow. The shoots are starting to grow. He says, what is it worth right now? It's not really grains yet. It's not really wheat yet. But in another couple of months, it'll be full grown wheat. So we judge this particular patch by the look at the rest of the patch. We judge it by its potential. We pay for the potential, not for what it is right now. How do we know what the potential is? The animal destroyed it. We look at the rest of the patch, see what it looks like at the end of the season, and we assume that these stalks of wheat would have turned the same way, and therefore this is the amount, and that's how we assess it. That's how we assess it. Which means, according to Taisa says, according to Rabbi Yosef, what happens if there was a hurricane that destroyed the rest of the patch? Then you pay nothing, because you're only paying for the potential what it could have been at the full season. But if the end of the full season was terrible rain and cyclones and it would have damaged all the field, then you pay nothing. But that's what you pay. Otherwise, in normal cases, you pay Meshur what the potential what it could have been. That's a basic rule. The Chachamim say no. You look at it now. Right now, it's just budding. Is Royin Oisa, it's just starting to grow. Royin Oisa Kama Oisa Yafa, the Kama Hi Yafa. You look at it now, what's the field worth with it and without it? At its current state. That's case number 2, Chazis. Case number 3, Ochla Smad. They ate the grapes that are just beginning to bud. And Rabbi Yeshua says the same thing. Royin Oisa, we look. We don't look at it at the current stage. We look at it if the season would have ended and been full grapes. You just denied these grapes the potential. You denied the ability to come to fruition. Therefore, you pay as if it was full body grapes. Some want to say that Yeshua is actually arguing that Rabbi Glili, even though in theory it sounds the same. But according to Rabbi Glili, he says, look at the rest of the field, which means if there was a hurricane and destroyed the rest of the field, you pay nothing. Rabbi Yeshua doesn't say, look at the rest of the field. Rabbi Yeshua just says, look at the grapes that you just destroyed. What would it have been worth if it would have been full grapes? We don't look at the rest of the field. In other words, even if there was a cyclone, we don't care. It's irrelevant at this point. You took away these grapes. It could have, who knows what would have happened, and therefore you have to pay as if it's full. The Chachamim say, Royin, no. You look at it its current state. You look at the land. Was it worth with it and without it? Now, nowhere do the Chachamim mention you do a multiple of 60, that whole thing we did before. You have 60 saw, you go back to a saw, and then the saw, what's the impact for this loss? But that's the law, which means the Bryce is not out to tell you, the multiple of 60. Once we know the formula, use it, apply it everywhere. You don't have to mention it every time. Rav Shimon ben Yehuda says, in our Mishnah, the Tanna Kama quoted Rav Shimon ben Yehuda, and said that if the grapes are full and you're about to harvest them, then we no longer look at the land, we just look at the grapes on their own. Comes along Rav Shimon ben Yehuda says, in the name of Rav Shimon ben Yehuda, when do we say that you look at the land before we even began to bud, like the shoots are just starting to come out? Oh, the shoots are just starting to come out. They don't even have an identity yet as an independent crop. So therefore, you assess it based on the land. But what happens if he ate a pagis, let's say a fig, but it's not really ripe? A boiser or a grape that's only halfway ripe, a lot more than just shoots. We imagine our Mishnah holds that the only time the grapes are considered independent from the land and you pay according to the grapes you damage only if it's full, if it's fully grown. He says, even if it's not fully grown, if it's half grown, it's considered as if already it's independent from the ground and you assess whatever the damage is. So the Abai concludes, Tani, we learned, however, we look at the grapes, we look at the land. What was the worth with the grapes and without the grapes in its current state? But like Tani B'Shishim was mentioned, word about 60. Elamai, what are you going to tell me? B'Shishim. It means 60. It doesn't mention it. So the same thing in the case of a man who goes ahead and damages somebody's vineyard. The Mishnah doesn't. The Bryce doesn't mention word about 60, but it obviously includes it. Okay.